In this video, I'm going to show you how I typically refactor my project before I begin the heavier technical work so I can make room for my backend technology and a database. If you don't know me, my name is Sean Boyce, and I've spent years building successful SaaS businesses. I'm building my next one in public with you so that you can borrow from my process to hopefully increase your chances of success. Subscribe if you don't want to miss a step along the way. In the previous video, we finished setting up our development environment. Today, we're going to focus on restructuring our project to make room for adding backend technology and hooking up a database. And this is all in an effort to prepare to prioritize our backlog and then work our way down that set of features from a development perspective. So why are we doing this step now? Well, to put it simply, it's much easier to refactor our project now than it will be later after we've added a ton of additional code. So we're going to set it up so that it's well organized and we can start layering in the critical technologies, which is going to enable us to round out the full custom stack, including the backend and the database. Also, this sets us up for future development as we continue to build in a fully custom way, so we're really going to need those technologies. We'll start first by refactoring, and then we'll layer in the backend and database technologies. So let's take a look. Okay, so I've got my cursor environment pulled up here again, and you can see the same structure that we've been using thus far. I've got my multiple terminal windows open. Here, this is my server window. Server is running, and it's got hot module reloading, or at least that's kind of how it's always been referred to for me. You can see that down below, where basically what that means is if we're making changes along the way, they will refresh so that you don't need to constantly stop and restart your server to see those changes. It's nice, convenient things like that that help improve the efficiency of your development workflow while you're working on your SaaS. Also, I've got my agent window on the right-hand side there, and I've got a prompt queued up, which I'm going to walk you through as well. Everything else here should look the same from when you saw it before, but basically what we're going to do is we're going to ask the agent, in particular Opus 4.5 via Anthropic's Claude Code, to help us with refactoring our project, and we're also giving it instructions in terms of why. So what my prompt says down below is basically that what we want to do is refactor the project and folder structure by moving anything related to the front-end technology. That's basically what gets served up on the client end. That's all the React stuff. We want to move that into a client folder, and then we're going to create a new folder called server, and we're going to add in the backend. In this case, it's going to be Python. So Python's one of my preferred open source technologies to go to for backend work because pretty much it can do everything. It's one of the most popular programming languages in the world these days. It can do anything you might need it to do, anything from relatively simple apps to heavy number crunching financial kind of stuff, which is kind of a little bit more along the lines of what we may be planning to do here. So I want to have that in this case. So I've asked it to both set us up with the refactor and to help walk us through adding in the new technology, that technology being Python here, as well as documenting everything along the way. And this is something I would recommend you do as well too. We can even incorporate that in terms of rules for Cursor and the AI technologies that we're using from a development perspective so that it is keeping track of everything that it's doing. But I've given that in its prompt. We're going to see how it does. I'm going to go ahead and kick this command off, let it do its thing, make sure I'm in agent mode down here below, which again is here. I've also moved my window so you guys can kind of see the prompt as well also. But again, all of this will be in the guide when I post this content, so you don't necessarily need to pull it right from here. I'm going to kick off this command, let it do its thing, fast forward through this part so you don't have to wait, and then once it's done, we're going to review the results. Okay, cursor is done. It did a ton on our behalf, followed the instructions very well. I'm going to review with you what it did so we can take a look at that together, and then I'm going to work through basically getting everything else set up in terms of having my client and my server running both in this project so that we can get back to basically where we were, but now with the heavy duty Python backend technology added. So one of the things I like about Cursor is it's documenting and showing you everything along the way. It's not that Claude Code doesn't do that. It's just in this interface for me, it's a little bit easier to follow and navigate around. So if we scroll back a little bit, you can see what it said once it completed everything. So here's how it completed the refactor, and it's given us a map of the entire directory structure that it created on our behalf as well too. So as I requested, it had moved all my client folders and files into a client folder, and it added the Python elements and the structure necessary to the server component as well also. There's more we need to do to kind of configure that all, set it up, and then get it running. We're going to do that as well too, but I just wanted to show you that. Also shows us things in terms of how it's currently configured in terms of where each of the servers are going to be running at. Similar URL, different port, because we are going to have those running in different places. That emulates where we're likely to set up once we have our project running as well. Also, different hosting environments is where they will likely be. as well as the commands necessary in order to run the servers, both the client and the backend element, front end and the backend element. As I mentioned, these are going to be separate now. So we're separating these elements out. Helps from my perspective in terms of organization and if they're going to live in different places, like I mentioned in the hosting environment setup. So that's how you run each. I'm going to go through those and set them up. I'll probably fast forward to that part so you don't have to wait through those boring elements, but I'm also going to keep the recording going and then summarize for you in the end how all that stuff worked. Now, also over here in the folder structure, you can see this as well too. I'm just going to show you here quickly. In the client folder, we've got everything here that was here before. In the client folder, the server stuff is here as well also. And then I also asked it to document elements along the way, including how to get everything set up. So if you come in here under the getting starting section, it's documented the entire process for us. And this is crazy helpful. If you want to know pretty much anything about your project, ask Cursor or an AI agent to do so for you, and then read all this information. If you're unfamiliar with any of these technological elements, this is an excellent way to learn them. So everything's here. That's exactly what I was looking for. I'm going to work on getting all that stuff set up. The last thing I'm going to mention is when it comes to your keys, and this is important from a security perspective, also sometimes is dependent on whether or not you're in the client or you're in the server or your front end, back end. But you've got these env files. And your env files, this is where all your keys and access codes are stored to connect your project to everything else, like your database, for example. And you can see here that it's got both the name for the variable and the value placeholder. And this is a .example file. So a lot of your env files, and you may have more than one depending on how many environments you have in the end, but all of that stuff gets stored in your env file. Now, these are never to be committed into your version control. Reason being, this is where all your keys and your secrets live. So that is information you want to keep safe and secure and make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands, because with that, they can compromise the structure, the security of your application. They can run up crazy high bills on your services and all that kind of stuff. So what we typically do in that case, so that we know we have a kind of like a copy or a template of what the env file should look like for a project for anybody who also wants to like pull it down and work on it locally, is we'll have an example file. And that's what this is. So this doesn't have any of my actual keys or sensitive information in it. This is an example of how my env file is structured for this project. This is something that's typically okay and safe to commit, but not any of the actual env files themselves. So I may or may not show you some of that stuff and then cycle my keys, but basically it looks the same as this. Sometimes you'll have a unique one for the server and a unique one for the client. Sometimes multiple versions of that, depending on how many different hosting environments you have as well also. Last thing I wanted to show you before I go to work over here, and then we connect up again to review how those results went. So hang out. Okay, so we have our front end server and our back end server running, and I also worked with the agent to kind of iron out a couple of things. So let me explain to you what I did. So one thing I may not have mentioned in the previous step was, in order to run both the front end and the back end now, which are going to be separate, and I created 2 instances of the terminal in order to be able to do so, and then name them appropriately, client and server, so I can keep track of everything. But you need to do so now from within the new directory. So we created a client directory to add all of our client files and organize them there. And we did the same thing on the server side. But now, in order to run each of those respective servers or instances, you have to be within that directory. So that's what is going on with these terminal instances. And this is kind of how I set up my development environment. So I've done that, and both are running. So here you can see where my front end is running from, including the URL, and same thing on the back end. So basically all I did was follow the instructions that it gave me in order to run my Python instance. And there's a couple of specific ones there in terms of how to do so with a technology like Python. I did run into a couple of issues. One was, and you'll see this previously in the video or in the fast forward section or whatever, but here in the terminal section, if you can follow my mouse pointer, basically there were a couple with like an infinity symbol or something like that. Those are instances of the terminal run in the background by Cursor. I've given Cursor somewhat liberal control over my development environment with some restrictions, but I do enable it to be able to kind of run commands in that way occasionally. However, if they are run and/or I want to remove them or I want to change how that works, I will interact with the agent to do so. So the first thing I did, because it does a lot of that stuff for testing purposes, which I do leverage from time to time, I asked it to kill those instances because I was going to run the server. I was going to run the front end server and the back end server myself, which is what's running now. So it did that for me. It cleaned it up. And then I tried to walk through the steps of firing up the Python instance. One of the errors I ran into, which you kind of can see here, I'll just highlight it. It says something about something already being in use. Got a lot of development projects that I'm working on from time to time, as you can imagine. So occasionally something may be stale and still running, but kind of holding on to a port the project itself is trying to use. So I worked with the cursor agent in order to help me clean some of that stuff up as well too. Once those things were fixed, I was able to follow the script and the server's running okay. Here I'll flip to the instance where it's currently running for how we change things now. And you can kind of browse around the landing page, the site, make sure everything's working okay. Just kind of go into my demo account here, make sure for the most part everything's interactive and functional. And so far so good. So it looks like for the most part we're in a good spot with what we've set up. The documenting every step along the way occasionally takes a little bit more time than expected, and I want to make sure that I don't miss a step for you guys. So what I'm probably going to do in this case is move the database functionality wiring up to this project as part of the next step in the process. So I'm going to do that as part of the next video that I create. The other thing I'll mention is we both have the front end and the back end now running. However, there isn't any functionality in the back end at the moment. So when we do have that, however, you will see here what's going on the server, just like you do on the client. So as you're making requests here and it's processing them, you will see any information or messages, warnings, or errors, just like you will on the server side as well too. So once we wire that kind of stuff up there, in terms of what our application is doing, we'll find helpful information here for debugging or troubleshooting or performance improvement, whatever it is we're trying to do with our application while we begin the development process. So that's it for this step in the process. Okay, so in this video, we refactored our project so that it is more well organized and we can build on top of that, making things a little bit cleaner and easier to manage moving forward. Plus, we added a backend technology in the form of Python, which is set up and ready for us to use with whatever we need as we continue to add functionality to our SaaS. The next step in the process is going to be to add database technology, which I'm typically preference leveraging something like SQL. In this case, it'll probably be Postgres, and I'm more than likely going to use the service provider Supabase, but we'll get into that in the next video in the process. Until then, I've added everything that I've done here and a guide for how to follow along with your respective project as part of a free resource for you that you can access by clicking the link in the description below. Just sign up for that. Again, it's all free. If you want access to any of the resources and the prompts and things like that I'm using as part of setting up my project and continuing to move forward with this build. So gain access to that, and I hope it helps you as part of your process as well too. If you've got any feedback or questions, please add it to the comments below, and happy building.